Thank you very much for
Okay,
your time. Tim Earl from GBH International. This is Mike Anthony, University of Michigan. Tim was what I guess we call one of our boots on the ground at the International Code Council Fire Code hearings. One of the topmost priorities for us was this new chapter on higher education laboratories. So, Tim, what happened?
so there were actually two competing proposals for that new chapter, one of which was broader and would have applied to laboratories in a broader sense, and then the one you're talking about was more specific for higher ed labs. So that one was approved. There was a lot of discussion among the proponents of both of those, and we were involved in those beforehand because I had some concerns about things like labs that were going to do fire testing should not have automatic sprinklers for reasons I thought were obvious. So those were debated. It was a pretty lengthy debate. The committee recommended F340, that's the one specific to higher ed, for approval. So that what that means is that will show up as approved as submitted, and that will go out for public comment along with everything. All of the committee action goes out for a public comment period. If nobody submits a public comment, that goes on the consent agenda, and that will show up in the 2018 IFC. If anybody submits any type of comment, whether to disapprove or modify it, then it will be debated again in October at the public comment hearings, and then the voting membership that are public officials only get to vote on that. So the committee action could be overturned. It takes 2/3 to overturn that, so it's a higher bar. Based on the testimony, I fully expect at least one public comment for disapproval. So we'll be debating this again in October and maybe some modifications. So there is a chance that if there were any specific issues on this proposal that you did have concerns about, you could submit a public comment to make a specific change to it.
Okay. Well, because we look at 24 issues a day, I don't get too emotional about any one of them, but I do have a pretty good eye for proposals that rise above the ordinary. And one of the criteria for rising above the ordinary is just how long the thing is. And the other is who wrote the darn thing. So here we are. So not knowing it as well as you, this was the one that I caught, or we caught. What was the outcome on this one? This was proposed.
So that was approved.
This one was approved. Okay, and this is the one that received.
Right, and you can see above there.
Right above here.
Well, at the very top, you see the proponent there. Actually, Michael Bryan is the fire chief from Brighton, but he represents, he chairs the Fire Code Action Committee. So that actually gave this proposal a lot of weight because the FCAC, actually Marcelo, my boss, serves on that committee as well. We participate in some of their calls. That's a group of stakeholders that get together to work on these proposals and reach consensus before they submit a proposal.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a higher chance of being approved because they have that credibility.
Yeah, I know. I when you chair a task force, I've done it myself. Very often, the powers that be determine an outcome by who they select as the committee chairman. So that's better than the alternatives, I suppose. So you mentioned that Michael O'Brien's in Brighton, Michigan, right?
Yeah, he's the fire chief over there. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So, all right. So I'll since we're always looking out. I guess I'm paid first by the University of Michigan. We also have to make sure. Oh, by the way, I don't think the state of Michigan. We don't adopt the IFC. We're NFPA 1 types over here.
However, and I don't know about Ann Arbor, but because we have a very strange system in Michigan, Michigan writes its own building code. So, for instance, the 2012 Michigan Building Code is based on the 2012 IBC, which references the IFC throughout. So what the state legislature does is just hands off the ball to local city councils and such and asks them to adopt the IFC. So I'm not sure about Ann Arbor, but I live in Portage, Michigan, and I know Portage adopted the 2012 IFC and will likely adopt, every 3 years just adopt the next edition of the IFC. So I have to look statewide, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but it is heavily adopted in Michigan.
Yeah, because I don't want to drive people nuts in this video clip of me switching around. One of the earlier posts on this does give a map, the ICC map of which states are adopting what code. Some of them adopt the whole thing, the entire state, whole cloth. But Michigan is identified as kind of a middle state where it's spotty, it's not consistent throughout. So I get that. Well, I didn't know, Tim, that Marcel is from California, right? He's a Sausalito. Right. He's a Sausalito, California guy, or a Palo Alto guy. So how did you? Maybe we should talk offline about that, about how you landed out there.
Yeah, we've known each other a long time. So I started working with him in 2008. But yeah, I work out of my own office in Portage. So.
Oh, okay. Well, oops, I just missed your. Well, we'll have to talk more, and if you want to talk a little bit more, because of time constraints here, I do need to get off the call. So let's finish what we were. Oh boy, here we go. Okay, so the higher education. This one did pass, and was it a unanimous or how did it pass?
You know, I didn't jot down the numbers on that one, but it really doesn't matter because I guarantee there'll be at least one public comment. I'd be shocked if there wasn't, which means it passed phase 1, so it'll go to phase 2, which is public comment, but it requires a 2/3 vote to overturn the committee.
Okay, I get that. That's sort of in a way how NFPA works. So here's why. There's the other reason why it's of interest to us, and it's that they seem to have put together. In here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see. So whenever you see organization, so national endorsements by this group here, so there's a lot of technicals here that may not appropriate right now. We just want a little update on this. But what they do is they show university representatives and fire safety people. And I know some of these people. I know Tony. I thought I saw Salvatore on here somewhere. Where's Salvatore? Maybe he's not on this one. From Rutgers, I believe. And who else do I know down there? Let's see. Okay, so long story short, are any of these people paying the bill for a lab? So let me refine the question. We distinguish ourselves. See, colleges and universities, especially the large research ones, are large enough so that they have individual units that are strictly enforcement. And this group here is all about enforcement. And who could possibly be against safety, okay? This is where we start. This is where the conversation gets a little bit dicey. So we would ask, okay, you have your checklist, you have your prescriptive requirements. Everybody likes prescriptive requirements. And who on this list has to reconcile the competing requirements of safety and economy? Somebody here has to answer the question. It looks like your fire safety requirements are putting us out of business. It looks like you enforcement compliance types so completely dominate the budget that our researchers don't want to come to the X university because you are adding a nickel to every research dollar of additional cost. That's the crux of the argument for the research industry in the United States. So this is probably an activist. So how would I answer the question? If somebody were to say to me, Mike, are these guys adding so much cost that we put either the state of Michigan or the Big Ten or the United States at a competitive disadvantage with some of these laboratories in Poland? How do we answer that question? You don't have to I don't want to put you on the spot because I know fire safety is your expertise, but you know a little bit about our agenda now. We can't, because you always pay. If there's an accident, God only knows that it seems to get fire accident, which is this one where this young lady unfortunately was killed by some Class D equipment, and they sued the researcher. Yeah, here it is. This is the one here. So, you know, my wife's a faculty person. This will put a chill on a lot of researchers when they realize the university won't back them up in these accidents, so it can get emotional very quickly. So again, I'll just restate the question. Answer it as best you can, or if you can't answer it now, you want to think about it. But are we overweight? Are we going to excess here to the point? Now remember, I don't have enough money to test my transfer switches. Over the hospital, we get 3 or 4 hits a year, and I'm supposed to test my transfer switches once a week, but I don't have money to do that because I'm putting it all into eye washes, or I'm putting it all into testing the fire pumps, or testing the fire alarm system, and I have 100 different safety criteria to keep my campus safe, but I can only afford to conform to the rules for 50 of them, and of the 50 that I can afford to conform to, I can only meet the prescriptive requirements for 20% of the testing. There's far more regulations than I can afford to conform with. How do I answer that question?
Right. Well, you've got to collect the data on it and see is this going to apply. I mean, some of it might. In one case, there may be an opportunity for savings because part of it talks about storing quantities of hazardous material without classifying as a Group H occupancy. If you had a lab that dealt with a lot of chemicals, maybe it's already classified as Group H, and it wouldn't have to be classified as Group H if you get into the details of this particular proposal. The focus seems to be on amounts of hazmat and storage of hazmat. So it'd really be taking a look at these requirements and seeing where your labs are now as far as compliance. There's a little bit about fire resistance of the floors, means of egress, and again, depending on where the labs are and how those occupancies are classified now, some of these, a lot of this may already be, you may already be in compliance, just check the block, and the only thing you really have to pay more attention to is the quantities of hazmat, of hazardous chemicals that you're handling and storing in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it's going to take research. It's not a simple, someone's going to have to take this chapter and look at their labs and determine what they need to do to comply, which isn't, that in and of itself is going to be a time-consuming exercise.
Mm-hmm. So my quest, here's Tim, by the way, who's our speaker here. Let's getting back to here. Okay, why was it broken out? Was higher education laboratories? Were you there at the moment of birth of this committee? What motivated them to break this out? Not that it isn't. Not that it isn't a special consideration. I'm always arguing that nothing's like a campus. But what was the inspiration? Was it this person here that saw something? Was there data that drove them to do this? Was there a competitive reason to try to compete with NFPA 45? Any insight into that?
I wasn't there for the genesis of it. All I can say is reference to the conversations I've had with some of the proponents and some of the people on the committee, just thoughts that your large industrial type labs are already complying with it. I mean, a lot of them are H occupancies anyway, just based on the amount of materials they have on hand. So there was a feeling, I think, by some people that higher ed labs kind of flew under the radar.
Okay, well, that
may or may not be true.
No,
and they wanted to specifically address them.
Yeah, now I understand in terms of just the money part of it. Very often private industry may be competing with the higher education, which is on research dollars. And if
I don't think it was about competition. It was just about they feel that they weren't they didn't have a reason to really a tool that they could reference in the code to take a closer look at these labs.
Okay, all right. Well, let me back up. I'll finish the thought. The thought was that let me start with an analog in the utility industry. Very often, some utilities have operations that are contractor-like, and those contractors say there's an unfair advantage because those utilities are protected by Public Service Commission, and they have an economic advantage over private contractors because they have these larger enterprises that support them. In a similar way, I can see where a small research lab says, yeah, I have to compete with I have to compete with a large university, and the large university can finance its brand identity on the football team, all kinds of stuff like that. There's all sorts of what the value of goodwill and the brand is if your research is done at University of California versus University of Florida, and you're somewhere in the middle in Missouri, and you want to be able to compete against them, you can't. You want to, and you have to conform to certain rules that they don't, because some of them are exempt from state regulations. In fact, in Michigan, you probably know this. The three largest universities are exempt from all codes and standards. Not that they actually do, but they can basically write their own rules. So that much said, it's not just a competitive issue among states, but it's also, as I try to point out here in the entire United States, we have to think about the degree to which our documents, and I try to make that point here. And I actually had some experience with this, where in Germany there's an international biotechnology standard, and they were putting in language that would put the United States at a disadvantage in competing with other internationals of biotechnology. So, okay, I don't want to belabor the point, but I get it. Tim, I'm really grateful that you've spent the time with us here, and it's really very fortunate that both Dan has business here, and obviously, Tim, you live here, and you're actually out there in Louisville. So I am running against a time constraint, and I've said it several times, but I really do need to get out the door here. And is there anything else that I can, first of all, I want to close this recording. Tim, is there something that I talked over you want a point that you wanted to make?
Only that if there is something that concerns you, specific details in this section, to kick them around, run them past me, because there will be a public comment period, and you can ensure that those are addressed in the public comment hearings, which should be October in St. Louis, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Part of my we did have a resource allocation issue. Our choice. I think I put 8 or maybe 10 proposals out in the Group B. In some of the plumbing and I think plumbing fire code here, I think some of ours went down. That's how we got in touch. But we do most of our work in ASHRAE, and because it moves so much faster, and because it's so more impactful than some of this area, and generally because there's a lot of good people in it, I find that if there's a lot of people, whether I agree with them or not, there's a lot of people in the space. Generally, the leading practices discovered. It's very much like an asset where you want so many shares traded on the value of a company. If you've got a lot of shares trading, you probably have discovered the price. That would not be the case in the ASHRAE suite, where there is very sparse participation. And it's largely because of mechanical engineers. I really enjoy, it's delightful to see that these people from these universities were part of it. And we wish we would have that on the energy codes, for example. Dan, is there something that you'd like to say in this recording before I turn the recording off?
No, nope. It's all been very interesting.
Okay, very good. I'll stop it, and I'll be posting this soon. So hang on there, Tim and Dan. And thank you, colleagues. This will be up there on the post very shortly.